good morning, good morning. Hello, Wasabi. Hello, Sniper. Hi, Icy. Good morning, you guys. Good morning. Hello, hello. Good morning. Before we get into our usual spiel for today, Calvin Frosta has given me a message to give to you guys as I started the stream. So he has written to me. Please tell chat I said. Warp warp grumble warple numble nibbles weebles wibbles warp gleeble narf gleep gloop zoic. And that is message from Calvin Frosthelm. Now that that's out of the way, how are you guys doing today? Pandat Cal guy. No, it's all Gucci. It's all Gucci. It's all Gucci. Anyway, oh no! My throat is dying. Oh no, are you getting sick? I see. I hope you feel better. I hope you feel better. That's the most beautiful thing you ever heard in my life? Well, I'll tell Cal you said that. I'll tell Cal you said that. I hope you're not getting. Oh, I'm sorry. I'm sorry to hear that your throat hurts. I hope you're not. I hope you're not. I hope that you're not getting sick. And if you are getting sick, I hope you feel better soon. I don't know. That's just what Cal wanted me to say, so I promised I would say it. So there we go. Yes, today's a story time, guys. We have a story time today. So I have relayed your message, Cal. That was the first thing I did after I said hello. Richard, hi. Hello, hello. How are you doing today, friend? Oh no, you rock. You rock, friend. Consume 2 500 milligram tablets of vitamin C. I would not do that. I would not. I highly recommend not doing that. That could be very bad. So that's a lot of vitamin C in one shot. I highly recommend not doing that. That's the legal dose. Are you sure? Are you sure that's like the daily dose a person can take? Me after overdosing on vitamin gummies. Jesus. That's the recommended amount per day. Jeez. Still, that's a lot of vitamins. Oops. There's a lot of vitamins to take in one shot, in my opinion. In my humble opinion. Also, Cal, I relayed your message. The first thing I did on stream after I said hello. So, you are welcome, friend. It's okay to consume too much vitamin C. You guys, that's incorrect. There is such a thing as a vitamin overdose. If you have too much vitamin C, you just piss it all out. I mean, technically, I'm not a doctor, so don't take any advice from me. None of us here are actual doctors, I have to assume. So I would highly recommend not. We're not medical professionals in the slightest. Jesus Christ. Do not consume radiation either. That's also terrible. My housemate is a pharmacist. You know what? Okay, I'll take your word for it. But today we're starting a new story. Hi Sarah, hello. I'm doing well today, friend. How are you doing today? I hope you're doing well today. You are doing good. I'm glad. 1 vitamin gummy is pretty good. 99 vitamin gummies. Oh, pretty good. 99 vitamin gummies later. Oh, that's God. But 1,000 milligrams a day is only for when you're sick or in the winter season. Also, it's okay to get radiation. It's also okay. No, it's not. Just eat rice to absorb the radiation. That's that one I can't even. Isn't banana radioactive? Yeah, they are. Bananas are naturally radioactive, which I've always found so funny. Just simply use Radaway if you're radiated. Fair enough. Fair enough. Alright, so today we're going to be reading a book called The Stranger by Albert Camus. This came out in the 40s. I believe 1946. It was originally a French novel. So we're reading the English translation of it today. And takes place in the 40s. Read The Stranger when I was in high school for sociology class. If you don't know sociology, or not too familiar with sociology, sociology is basically the study of human behavior, human conditioning, kind of like nature versus nurture and other influences on human behavior kind of thing. And this book was one of the ones I've read to kind of give like an interesting perspective inside of a mind of, a mind of one person under doing certain actions under certain conditions of his life. So I'm actually pretty excited to start reading this story. So I want to be able to read it with you guys. So I could just stay a bit, but I'm gonna go ahead and put things down by my throat to feel better. See ya. Okay, I see. Make sure to drink warm drinks with lots of honey. Honey is very good for the sore throat, so have some warm tea and honey. Drink cool water to help soothe it too. So. The first person made a book in 1946. How did he have the time? I don't know. Probably took time out of his busy day to do some writing. But we're gonna get started, okay? I hope you guys got something cozy. Get yourself something to snack on or drink. Get nice and comfy, cozy, and let's get into it. All right, The Stranger by Albert Camus. Part 1. This is actually, I'm just gonna let you guys know, this is a very short book. It has at most 123 pages in it related to the story, so it'll be a pretty quick read. Maybe 1 or 2 parts at most. Alright? So let's get into it. Part 1. Wasabi, don't you dare. Don't you dare. Absolutely not. I will ban you for real. Do not even. Okay? No. No. I'm glad you can't go on. That's a big no-no. Big no-no. Okay. Let's get it. I'm gonna have a sip of tea myself, and then we're gonna get into it. I'm also having tea today. I'm having some tea and honey. Alright. Part 1. My mom died today. Or maybe yesterday. I don't know. I got a telegram from the home. Mother deceased. Funeral tomorrow. Faithfully yours. That doesn't mean anything. Maybe it was yesterday. The old people's home is at Marengo, about 80 kilometers from Algiers. I'll take the 2 o'clock bus and get there in the afternoon. That way I can be there for the vigil and come back tomorrow night. I asked my boss for 2 days off, and there was no way he was going to refuse me with an excuse like that. But he wasn't too happy about it. I even said it's not my fault. He didn't say anything. Then I thought I should have apologized. Then I thought I shouldn't have said that. After all, I didn't have anything to apologize for. He was the one who should have offered his condolences. But he probably will after tomorrow. The day after tomorrow, when he sees I'm in mourning. For now, it's as if Maimon weren't dead. After the funeral, though, the case will be closed, and everything will have a more official feel to it. I caught the 2 o'clock bus. It was very hot. I ate at the restaurant, at Celeste's, as usual. Everybody felt sorry for me, and Celeste said, "You only have one mother." When I left, they walked me to the door. I was a little distracted because I still had to go up to Emmanuel's place tomorrow to borrow a black tie and an armband. He lost his uncle a few months back. I ran so as not to miss the bus. It's probably because of all the rushing around, and on top of that, the bumpy ride, the smelly gasoline, and the glare of the sky and the road that I dozed off. I slept almost the whole way, and when I woke up, I was slumped against a soldier who smiled at me and asked if I had been traveling long. I said yes, just so I wouldn't have to say anything else. The home is 2 kilometers from the village. I walked there. I wanted to see my mom right away, but the caretaker told me I had to see the director first. He was busy, so I waited a while. The caretaker talked the whole time, and then I saw the director. I was shown into his office. He was a little old man with a ribbon of the Legion of Honor on his lapel. He looked at me with his clear eyes. Then he shook my hand and held it so long I didn't know how to get it loose. He thumbed through the file and said, "Madame Meursault came to us 3 years ago. You were her sole support." I thought he was criticizing me for something, and I started to explain, but he cut me off. "You don't have to justify yourself, my dear boy. I've read your mother's file. You weren't able to provide for her properly. She needed someone to look after her. You earned only a modest salary. And the truth of the matter is, she was happier here." I said, "Yes, sir." He added, "You see, she had friends here, people her own age. She was able to share things from the old days with them. You're young, and it must have been hard for her with you." It was true. When she was at home with me, my mom used to spend her time following me with her eyes, not saying a thing. For the first 3 days she was at the home, she cried a lot. That was because she wasn't used to it. A few months later, she would have cried if she had been taken out. She was used to it. That's partly why I didn't go there as much this past year. And also because it took up my Sunday, not to mention the trouble of getting to the bus, buying tickets, and spending 2 hours traveling. The director spoke to me again. But I wasn't really listening anymore. Then he said, "I suppose you'd like to see your mother." I got up without saying anything, and he led the way to the door. On the way downstairs, he explained. We moved her to our little mortuary so as not to upset the others. Whenever one of the residents dies, the others are a bit on edge for the next 2 or 3 days, and that makes it difficult to care for them. We crossed we crossed a courtyard where there were lots of old people chatting in little groups. As we went by, talking would stop, and the conversation would start up again behind us. It sounds like the muffled jabber of parakeets. The director stopped now at the door of a small building. "I leave you now, Monsieur Messel. If you need me for anything, I'll be in my office." As is usually the case, the funeral is set for 10 o'clock in the morning. This way you'll be able to keep vigil over the departed. One last thing. It seems your mother often expressed to her friends her desire for a religious burial. I've taken the liberty of making the necessary arrangements, but I wanted to let you know. I thanked him. While not an atheist, my mom never had in her life given a thought to religion. I went in. It was a very bright, whitewashed room with a skylight for a roof. The furniture consisted of some chairs and some cross-shaped sawhorses. 2 of them in the middle of the room were supporting a closed casket. All you could see were some shiny screws, not screwed down all the way, standing out against the walnut-stained planks. Near the casket was an Arab nurse in a white smock with a bright-colored scarf on her head. Just then the caretaker came in behind me. He must have been running. He stuttered a little. "We put the cover on, but I was supposed to unscrew the casket so you could see her." He was moving towards the casket when I stopped him. He said, "You don't want to?" I answered no. He was quiet, and I was embarrassed because I felt I shouldn't have said that. He looked at me and then asked, "Why not?" But without criticizing, as if he just wanted to know. I said, "I don't know." He started twirling his mustache, and then without looking at me again, he said, "I understand." He had nice pale blue eyes and a reddish complexion. He offered me she had a bandage wrapped around her head just below the eyes. Where her nose should have been, the bandage was all flat. All you could see of her face was the whiteness of the bandage. When she'd gone, the caretaker said, "I'll leave you alone." I don't know what kind of gesture I made, but he stayed where he was behind me. Having his presence breathing down my neck was starting to annoy me. The room was filled with beautiful late afternoon sunlight. 2 hornets were buzzing against the glass roof. I could feel myself getting sleepy. Without turning around, I said to the caretaker, "Have you been here long?" Right away he answered, 5 years, as if he'd been waiting all along for me to ask. After that, he did a lot of talking. He would have been very surprised if anyone had told him he would end up caretaking at the Marengo home. He was 64 and came from Paris. At that point, I interrupted him. "Oh, you're not from around here." Then I remembered that before taking me to the director's office, he had talked to me about my mom. He told me that they had to bury her quickly because it gets hot in the plains, especially in this part of the country. This is when he told me he had lived in Paris and that he had found it hard to forget it. In Paris, they kept vigil over the body for 3, sometimes 4 days. But here, you barely have time to get used to the idea before you have to start running after the hearse. His wife had said to him, "Hush now, this is not the sort of thing to be telling the gentleman." The old man blushed and apologized. I stepped in and said, "No, not at all." I thought what he'd been saying was interesting and made sense. In the little mortuary, he told me that he'd come to the home because he was destitute. He was in good health, so he offered to take the job of a caretaker. I pointed out that even so, he was still a resident. He said no, he wasn't. I'd already been struck by the way he had the way of saying they or the others, and left often the old people, talking about the patients, when some of them weren't any older than he was. But of course it wasn't the same. He was a caretaker, and to a certain extent he had authority over them. Just then the nurse came in. I had fallen suddenly. Darkness had gathered quickly above the skylight. The caretaker turned the switch, and I was blinded by a sudden flash of light. He suggested I go to the dining hall for dinner, but I wasn't hungry. Then he offered to bring me a cup of coffee with milk. I like milk in my coffee, so I said yes. He came back a few minutes later with a tray. I drank the coffee. Then I felt like having a smoke. But I hesitated, because I didn't know if I could do it with my mom right there. I thought about it. It didn't matter. I offered the caretaker a cigarette and we smoked. At one point he said, "You know, your mother's friends will be coming to keep vigil too. It's customary. I have to go get some chairs and some black coffee." I asked him if he could turn off one of the lights. The glare on the white walls was making me drowsy. He said he couldn't. That was how they'd been wired. It was all or nothing. I didn't pay too much attention to him after that. He left, came back, set up some chairs. On one of them he stacked some cups around a coffee pot. Then he sat down across from me on the other side of Maimon. The nurse was on the side of that room too, with her back to me. I couldn't see what she was doing, but the way her arms were moving made me think she was knitting. It was pleasant. The coffee had warmed me up, and the smell of flowers on the night air was coming through the open door. I think I dozed off for a while. It was a rustling sound that woke me up. Because I had my eyes closed, the whiteness of the room seemed even brighter than before. There wasn't a shadow anywhere in front of me, and every object, every angle, every curve stood out so sharply that it made my eyes hurt. That's when Maimon's friends came in. There were about 10 in all, and they floated into the blinding light without a sound. They sat down without a single chair creaking. I saw them more clearly than I had ever seen anyone, and not one detail of their faces or their clothes escaped me. But I couldn't hear them, and it was hard for me to believe they really existed. Almost all the women were wearing aprons, and the strings, which were tied tight around their waists, made their bulging stomachs stick out even more. I'd never noticed what huge stomachs old women can have. Almost all the men were skinny and carried canes. What struck me most about their faces was that I couldn't see their eyes, just a faint glimmer in a nest of wrinkles. When they sat down, most of them looked at me and nodded awkwardly, their lips sucked in by their toothless mouths. I couldn't tell if they were greeting me or if it was a nervous tick. I think they were greeting me. It was then that I realized they were all sitting across from me, nodding their heads, grouped around the caretaker. For a second, I had the ridiculous feeling that they were there to judge me. Soon one of the women started crying. She was in the second row, hidden by one of her companions, and I couldn't see her very well. She was crying softly, steadily, in little sobs. I thought she'd never stop. The others seemed to not hear her. They sat there hunched up, gloomy and silent. They would look at the casket or their canes or whatever else, but that's all they would look at. The woman kept on crying. It surprised me, because I didn't know who she was. I wish I didn't have to listen to her anymore, but I didn't dare say anything. The caretaker leaned over and said something to her, but she shook her head, mumbling something, and went on crying as much as before. Then the caretaker came around to my side. He sat down next to me. After a long pause, he explained, without looking at me. She was very close to your mother. She says your mother was her only friend, and now she hasn't gotten anyone. We just sat there, like that, for quite a while. The woman's sighs and sobs were quieting down. She sniffled a lot, then finally shut up. I didn't feel dressed anymore, but I was tired and my back was hurting me. Now it was all these people not making a sound that was getting on my nerves. Except every now and then I'd hear a strange noise and I couldn't figure out what it was. Finally I realized that some of the old people were sucking on the insides of their cheeks and making these weird smacking noises. They were so lost in their thoughts that they weren't even aware of it. I even had the impression that the dead woman lying in front of them didn't mean anything to them. But I think now that was a false impression. We all had some coffee, served by the caretaker. After that, I don't know anymore. The night passed. I remember opening my eyes at one point and seeing that all the old people were slumped over asleep except for one old man, with his chin resting on the back of his hands wrapped around his cane, who was staring at me as if he were just waiting for me to wake up. Then I dozed off again. I woke up because my back was hurting more and more. Dawn was creeping up over the skyline. Soon afterwards, one of the old men woke up and coughed a lot. He kept hacking into a large checkered handkerchief, and every cough was like a convulsion. He woke the others up, and the caretaker told them that they ought to be going. They got up. The uncomfortable visual had left their faces ashen-looking. On the way out, and much to my surprise, they all shook my hand, as if the night during which we hadn't exchanged as much as a single word had somehow brought us closer together. I was tired. The caretaker took me to his room and I was able to clean up a little. I had some more coffee and milk, which was very good. I went outside. The sun was up. Above the hills that separated Marengo from the sea, the sky was streaked with red, and the wind coming over the hills brought the smell of salt with it. It was going to be a beautiful day. It had been a long time since I'd been out in the country, and I could feel how much I'd enjoy going for a walk if it hadn't been for my mom. But I waited in the courtyard under a plane tree. I breathed in the smell of fresh earth, and I wasn't sleepy anymore. I thought of the other guys at the office. They'd be getting up to go to work about this time. For me, that was always the most difficult time of day. I thought about those things a little more, but I was distracted by the sound of a bell ringing inside the buildings. There was some commotion behind the windows, and everything was quieted down again. The sun was now a little higher in the sky, and was starting to warm my feet. The caretaker came across the courtyard and told me that the director was asking for me. I went to his office. He had me sign a number of documents. I noticed that he was dressed in black with pin-stripped trousers. He picked up the telephone and turned to me. The undertaker's men arrived a few minutes ago. I was going to ask them to seal the casket. Before I do, would you like to see your mother one last time? I said no. He gave the order to the telephone, lowering his voice. Viniak, tell the men they can go ahead. After that, he told me he would be attending the funeral when I thanked him. He sat down by his desk and crossed his short legs. He informed me that he and I would be the only ones there, apart from the nurse on duty. The residents usually weren't allowed to attend funerals. He gave me Thomas Perez permission to join the funeral procession. At that, the director smiled. He said, "I'm sure you understand. It's a rather childish sentiment. He and your mother were almost inseparable. The others used to tease them and say, Perez has a fiancé. He'd laugh. They'd enjoy it. And the truth is, he's taking Madame Marcel's death very hard. But I didn't think I could rightfully refuse him permission. But on the advice of our visiting physician, I did not allow him to keep the vigil last night. We didn't say anything for quite a long time. The director stood up and looked out the window of his office. A moment later he said, Here's the priest from Marengo already. He's early. He warned me that it would take at least 3/4 of an hour to walk to the church, which is in the village itself. We went downstairs. Out in front of the building stood the priest and the 2 altar boys. One of them was holding a censer, and the priest was leaning towards him, adjusting the length of its silver chain. As we approached, the priest straightened up. He called me my son and said a few words to me. He went inside. I followed. I noticed right away that the screws in the casket had been tightened, and there were 4 men wearing black in the room. The director was telling me that the hearse was waiting out in the road, and at the same time I could hear the priest beginning his prayers. From then on, everything happened very quickly. The men moved towards the casket with the pall. The priest, his acolytes, the director, and I all went outside. A woman I didn't know was standing by the door. Monsieur Massot, the director said. I didn't catch the woman's name. I just understood that she was the nurse assigned by the home. Without smiling, she lowered her long, gaunt face. Then we stepped aside to make way for the body. We followed the pallbearers and left the home. Outside the gate stood the hearse. Varnished, glossy, and oblong, it reminded me of a pencil box. Next to it was the funeral director, a little man in a ridiculous getup, and an awkward, embarrassed-looking old man. I realized now that it was Monsieur Perez. He was wearing a soft felt hat with a round crown and a wide brim. He took it off as the casket was coming through the gate. A suit with trousers that were corkscrewed down around his ankles, and a black tie with a knot that was too small for the big white collar of his shirt. His lips were trembling below a nose dotted with blackheads. Strange, floppy, thick-rimmed ears stuck out through his fine white hair, and I was struck by the blood-red color next to the pallor of his face. The funeral director assigned us our places. First came the priest, then the hearse. Flanking it, the 4 men. Behind it, the director and myself, and bringing up the rear, the nurse and Monsieur Perez. The sky was already filled with light. The sun was beginning to bear down on the earth, and it was getting hotter by the minute. I don't know why we waited so long before getting underway. I was hot in my dark clothes. The little old man who had put his hat back on took it off again. I turned a little in his direction and was looking at him for when the director started talking to me about him. He told me that my mother and Monsieur Perez used to often walk down to the village together in the evenings, accompanied by the nurse. I was looking at the countryside around me, seeing the rows of cypress trees leading up to the hills next to the sky, and the houses standing out here and there against the red and green earth. I was able to understand Maman better. Evenings in that part of the country must have been a kind of sad relief. But today, with the sun bearing down, making the whole landscape shimmer with heat, it was inhuman and oppressive. We got underway. It was then that I noticed that Perez had a slight limp. Little by little, the hearse was picking up speed and the old man was losing ground. One of the men flanked the hearse and had also dropped back and was now even with me. I was surprised at how fast the sun was climbing in the sky. I noticed that for quite some time the countryside had been buzzing with the sound of insects and the crackling of grass. The sweat was pouring down my face. I wasn't wearing a hat, so I fanned myself with my handkerchief. The man from the Undertaker said something to me which I missed. He was lifting the edge of his cap with his right hand and wiping his head with the handkerchief in his left at the same time. I said, "What?" He pointed up to the sky and repeated, "Pretty hot." I said, "Yes." A minute later he asked, "Is that your mother in there?" Again I said, "Yes." Was she old? I answered, "Fairly," because I didn't know the exact number. After that he was quiet. I turned around and saw old Perez about 50 meters behind us. He was going as fast as he could, swinging his felt hat at the end of his arm. I looked at the director, too. He was walking with great dignity, without a single wasted motion. A few beads of sweat were forming on his head, but he didn't wipe them off. The procession seemed to me to be moving a little faster. All around me was still the same glowing countryside flooded with sunlight. The glare from the sky was unbearable. At one point we went over a section of the road that had just been repaved. The tar had burst open in the sun. Our feet sank into it, leaving shiny pulp exposed. Sticking up above the top of her hearse, the coachman's hard leather hat looked as if it had been molded out of the same black mud. I felt a little lost between the blue and the white of the sky and the monotony of colors around me. The sticky black of the tar, the dull black of all the clothes, and the shiny black of the hearse. All of it, the sun, the smell of leather and horse dung from the hearse, the smell of varnish and incense, and my fatigue after a night without sleep, was making it hard for me to see or think straight. I turned around again. Perez seemed to be way back there, fading in the shimmering heat. Then I lost sight of him altogether. I looked around and saw that he had left the road and cut across the field. I also noticed there was a bend in the road up ahead. I realized that Perez, who knew the country, was taking a shortcut in order to catch up with us. By the time we rounded the bend, he was back with us. Then we lost him again. He set off cross-country once more, and so it went on. I could feel the blood pounding at my temples. After that, everything seemed to happen so fast, so deliberately, so naturally that I don't remember any of it anymore. Except for one thing. As we entered the village, the nurse spoke to me. She had a remarkable voice which didn't go with her face at all, a melodious, quavering voice. She said, "If you go slowly, you risk getting sunstroke, but if you go too fast, you work up a sweat and then catch a chill inside the church." She was right. There was no way out. Several other images from that day have stuck in my mind. For instance, Perez's face when he caught up with us for the last time, just outside the village. Big tears of frustration and exhaustion were streaming down his cheeks, and because of all the wrinkles, they weren't dripping off. They were spread out and ran together again, leaving a watery film over his ruined face. There was the church, and the villagers on the sidewalks, the red geraniums on the graves of the cemetery. Perez fainting, he crumpled like a rag doll. The blood-red earth spilling over Maimon's casket, the white flesh of the roots mixed in with it. More people, voices. The village, waiting in front of a cafe, the incessant drone of the motor, and my joy when the bus entered the nest of lights that was Algiers, and I knew I was going to go to bed and sleep for 12 hours. Chapter 2. As I was waking up, it came to me why my boss had seemed annoyed when I had asked for 2 days off. Today is Saturday. I'd sort of forgotten, but as I was getting up, it came to me. And naturally, my boss thought about the fact that I'd be getting 4 days vacation that way, including Sunday, and he couldn't have been happy about that. But in the first place, it isn't my fault if they buried my mom yesterday instead of today, and second, I would have had Saturday and Sunday off anyway. Obviously, that still doesn't keep me from understanding my boss's point of view. I had a hard time getting up because I was so tired from the day before. While I was shaving, I wondered what I was going to do, and I decided to go for a swim. I caught the streetcar to go to the public beach down the harbor. Once there, I dove into the channel. There were a lot of young people. In the water, I ran into Marie Cardona, a former typist from our office, who had had a thing at the time. She did too, I think, but she left soon afterwards, and we didn't have the time. I helped her onto a float as I did. I brushed against her breasts. I was still in the water when she was already lying flat on her stomach on the float. She turned towards me. Her hair was in her eyes and she was laughing. I hoisted my stuff up next to her. It was nice, and sort of joking around, I let my head fall back and rest on her stomach. She didn't say anything, so I left it there. I had the whole sky in my eyes, and it was blue and gold. On the back of my neck, I could feel Marie's heart beating softly. Together. She laughed the whole time. On the dock, while we were drying ourselves off, she said, "I'm darker than you." I asked her if she wanted to go to the movies that evening. She laughed again and told me that it was a Fernandel movie she would like to see. Once we were dressed, she seemed very surprised to see I was wearing a black tie and asked me if I was in mourning. I told her my mom had died. She wanted to know how long ago, so I said yesterday. She gave a little start but didn't say anything. I felt like telling her it wasn't my fault, but I stopped myself because I remembered that I already said that to my boss. It didn't mean anything. Besides, you always feel a little guilty. By that evening, Maria had forgotten all about it. The movie was funny in parts, but otherwise it was just too stupid. She had her leg pressed against mine. I was fondling her chest. Towards the end of the show, I gave her a kiss, but not a good one. She came back to my place. When I had woke, Marie had gone. She explained to me that she had to go to her aunt's. I remembered that it was Sunday, and that bothered me. I don't like Sundays. So I rolled over, tried to find the salty smell of Marie's hair had left on the pillow, and slept until 10. Then I smoked a few cigarettes, still in bed, till noon. I didn't feel like having lunch at Celeste's like I usually did, because they'd be sure to ask questions, and I don't like that. I fixed myself some eggs and ate them out of the pan, without bread because I didn't have any left, and I didn't feel like going downstairs to buy some. After lunch, I was a little bored, and I wandered around my apartment. It was just the right size when my mom was here. Now it's too big for me, and I've had to move the dining room table into my room. I lived in just one room now, with some saggy straw chairs, a wardrobe whose mirror has gone yellow, a dressing table, and a brass bed. I've let the rest go. A little later, just for something to do, I picked up an old newspaper and read it. I cut out an advertisement for Crunch Salts and stuck it in an old notebook where I put things from papers that interest me. I also washed my hands, and then I went out onto the balcony. My room looks out over the main street of the neighborhood. It was a beautiful afternoon, yet the pavement was wet and slippery, and what few people there were in a hurry. First, there was families out for a walk. 2 little boys in sailor suits with trousers below the knee, looking a little cramped in their stiff clothes. And a little girl with a big pink bow and black patent leather shoes. Behind them, an enormous mother in a brown silk dress, and the father, a rather frail little man I know by sight. He had on a straw hat and a bow tie, and was carrying a walking stick. Seeing him with his wife, I understood why people in the neighborhood said he was distinguished. A little later, the local boys went by, hair greased back, red ties, tight-fitting jackets, with embroidered pocket handkerchiefs and square-toed shoes. I thought they must be heading to the movies in town. That was why they were leaving so early and hurried toward the streetcar, laughing loudly. Excuse me. After them, the street slowly emptied out. The matinees had all started, I guess. The only ones left were the shopkeepers and the cats. The sky was clear but dull above the fig trees lining the streets. On the sidewalk, across the way, the tobacconist brought out a chair, set it in front of his door and straddled it, resting his arms on the back. The streetcar, packed a few minutes before, was almost empty. In a little cafe, Cher Pirot, next door to the tobacconist, the waiter was sweeping up the sawdust in the deserted restaurant inside. It was Sunday, all right. I turned my chair around and set it down like the tobacconist because I found that it was more comfortable that way. I smoked a couple of cigarettes, went aside to get a piece of chocolate, and went back to the window to eat it. Soon after that, the sky grew dark, and I thought we were in for a summer storm. Gradually, though, it cleared up again, but the passing clouds had left a hint of rain hanging over the streets, which made it look darker. I sat there for a long time and watched the sky. At 5 o'clock, some streetcars pulled up, clanging away. They were bringing back gangs of fans from the local soccer stadium. They were crowded onto the running boards and hanging from their handrails. The streetcars that followed brought back the players, whom I recognized by their little athlete bags. They were shouting and singing at the top of their lungs that their team would never die. Several of them waved at me. One of them yelled to me, "We beat them!" and I nodded as if to say yes. From then on, there was a steady stream of cars. The sky had changed again. Above the rooftops, the sky had taken on a reddish glow, and with evening coming on, the streets came back to life. People were straggling back from their walks. I recognized the distinguished little man among the others. Children were either crying or lagging behind. Almost all at once, moviegoers spilled out of the neighborhood theaters into the streets. The young men among them were gesturing more excitedly than usual, and I thought they may have seen an adventure film. The ones who had gone to the movies in town came back a little later. They looked more serious. They were still laughing, but only now and then, and they seemed tired and dreamy. But they hung around anyway, walking up and down the sidewalk across the street. The local girls, bareheaded, were walking arm in arm. The young man had made sure they would have to bump right into them, and then they would make cracks. The girls giggled and turned their heads away. Several girls, of whom I knew, waved to me. Then the street lamps came on all of a sudden, and made the first stars appear in the night sky grow dim. I felt my eyes getting tired from watching the street filled with so many people and lights. The street lamps were making the pavement glisten, and the light from the streetcar would glint off somebody's shiny hair, or off a smile or a silver bracelet. Soon afterwards, with the streetcars running less often, and the sky already blue above the trees and the lamps, the neighborhood emptied out almost imperceptibly, until the first cat slowly made its way across the now deserted street. Then I thought maybe I ought to have some dinner. My neck was a little stiff from resting my chin on the back of my chair for so long. I went downstairs to buy some bread and spaghetti, did my cooking, and ate standing up. I wanted to smoke a cigarette at the window, but the air was getting colder, and I felt a little chilled. I shut my window, and as I was coming back, I glanced at the mirror and saw a corner of my table with my alcohol lamp next to some pieces of bread. It occurred to me that anyway one more Sunday was over, that Maman was now buried, and I was going back to work, and that really nothing had changed. Chapter 3. I worked hard at the office today. The boss was nice. He asked me if I wasn't too tired, and he also wanted to know Maman's age. I said, about 60. I said not to make a mistake, and I don't know why, but he seemed to be relieved somehow to consider the matter closed. There was a stack of freight invoices that had been piled up on my desk, and I had to go through them all. Before leaving the office to go to lunch, I washed my hands. I really like doing this at lunchtime. I don't enjoy it so much in the evening, because the roll of towel you use is soaked through. One towel has to last all day. I mentioned it once to my boss. He told me he was sorry, but it really was a minor detail. I left a little late, at 12:30, with Emmanuel, who works as a dispatcher. The office overlooks the sea, and we took a minute to watch the freighters in the harbor, which was ablaze with sunlight. Then a truck came towards us with its chains rattling and its engine backfiring. Emmanuel said, "How about it?" And I started running. The truck passed us and we ran after it. I was engulfed by the noise and the dust. I couldn't see anything, and all I was conscious of was the sensation of hurtling forward in a mad dash through cranes and winches, masts bobbing on the horizon, and the hulls of ships alongside us as we ran. I was the first to grab hold and take a flying leap. Then when I reached out and helped Emmanuel scramble up, we were out of breath. The truck was bumping around on the uneven cobblestones of the quay in a cloud of dust and sun. Emmanuel was laughing so hard he could barely breathe. We arrived at Celeste's, dripping with sweat. Celeste was there, as always, with his big belly, his apron, and his white mustache. He asked me if things were all right now. I told him yes they were, and I said I was hungry. I ate fast and had some coffee. Then I went home and slept for a while because I'd drunk too much wine, and when I woke up, I felt like having a smoke. It was late, and I ran to catch a streetcar. I worked all afternoon. It got very hot in the office, and in that evening, when I left, I was glad to walk back slowly along the docks. The sky was green. It felt good, but I went straight home because I wanted to boil myself some potatoes. On my way upstairs in the dark, I ran into old Salamano, my neighbor across the landing. He was with his dog. The two of them had been inseparable for 8 years. The spaniel had a skin disease. After living together so long, the two of them alone in one tiny room, they ended up looking like each other. Old Salamano had with reddish scabs on his face and wispy yellow hair. As for the dog, he sort of taken on his master's stupid look, muzzle down, neck straining. They look as if they belong to the same species, and yet hate each other. Twice a day, at 11 and 6, the old man takes the dog out for a walk. They haven't changed their route in 8 years. You can see them in the Rue de Lyon, the dog pulling the man along until old Salamano stumbles. Then he beats the dog and swears at it. The dog cowers and trails behind. Then it's the old man who pulls the dog. Once the dog is forgotten, it starts dragging its master along again, and again it gets beaten and sworn at. Then they both stand there on the sidewalk and stare at each other. The dog in terror and the man in hatred. It's the same thing every day. When the dog wants to urinate, the old man won't give him enough time and yanks him, so the spaniel leaves behind a trail of little drops. If the dog has an accident in the room, it gets beaten again. This has been going on for 8 years. Celeste is always saying it's pitiful, but really, who's to say? When I ran into him on the stairs, Salamano was swearing away at the dog. He was saying, "Filthy, stinking bastard," and the dog was whimpering. I said, "Good evening," but the old man just went on cursing. So I asked him what the dog had done. He didn't answer. All he said was, "Filthy, stinking bastard," and I could barely see him leaning over his dog, trying to fix something on its collar. I spoke louder. Then, without turning around, he answered with a kind of suppressed rage. "He's always there." And then he left, yanking at the animal, which was letting itself be dragged along, whimpering. Just then, my other neighbor came in. The word around the neighborhood is that he lives off women. When you ask him what he does, he's a warehouse guard. Generally speaking, he's not very popular, but he often talks to me and sometimes stops by my place for a minute, because I listen to him. I find what he has to say interesting. Besides, I don't have any reason not to talk to him. His name is Raymond Sintez. He's a little on the short side, with broad shoulders and a nose like a boxer's. He always dresses very sharp. And once he said to me, talking about Salamano, "If that isn't pitiful," he asked me, didn't I think it was disgusting, and I said no. And we went upstairs, and I was about to leave him when he said, "I've got some blood sausages and some wine at my place. How about joining me?" I figured it would save me the trouble of having to cook for myself, so I accepted. He has only one room too, in a little kitchen with no window. Over his bed he has a pink and white plaster angel, some pictures of a famous athletes, and 2 or 3 photographs of naked women. The room was dirty and the bed wasn't made. First he lit his paraffin lamp, and then he took a pretty dubious-looking bandage out of his pocket and wrapped it around his right hand. I asked him what he had done to it. He said he'd been in a fight with some guy who was trying to start trouble. "You see, Monsieur Masseau," he said, "it's not that I'm a bad guy, but I have a short fuse. This guy says to me, if you're man enough, you'll get down off that streetcar. I said, come on, take it easy. And then he said, you're yellow. So I got off and said to him, I think you better stop right there or I'm going to have to teach you a lesson. And he says, you and who else? So I let him have it. He went down. I was about to help him up and he started kicking me from there on the ground. So I kneed him one and slugged him a couple of times. His face was all bloody. I asked him if he had enough. He said yes. All this time, Sentence was fiddling with the bandage. While sitting on the bed, he said, so you see, I wasn't the one who started it. He was asking for it. It was true, and I agreed. Then he told me that, as a matter of fact, he wanted to ask my advice about the whole business because I was a man, and I knew about things. I could help him out, and then we'd be pals. I didn't say anything, and he asked me again if I wanted to be pals. I said it was fine with me. He seemed pleased. He got out the blood sausages, fried it up, and set out the glasses, plates, knives, forks, and 2 bottles of wine. All this in silence. Then we sat down. As we ate, he started telling me his story. He was a little hesitant at first. I knew this lady. As a matter of fact, well, she was my mistress. The man he had the fight with was this woman's brother. He told me he had been keeping her. I didn't say anything, yet right away he added that he knew what people around the neighborhood were saying, but that his conscience was clear and that he was a warehouse guard. To get back to what I was saying, he continued, I realized that she was cheating on me. He had been giving her just enough to live on. He paid the rent on her room and gave her 20 francs a day for food. 300 francs for the room, 600 for food, a pair of stockings every now and then. That made 1,000 francs, and Her Highness refused to work. But she was always telling me that things were too tight, and that she couldn't get by on what I was giving her. And I said to her, well, why not work half days? You'd be helping me out on all the little extras. I bought you a new outfit just this month. I give you 20 francs a day. I pay you rent, and what do? You have coffee in the afternoon with your friends. You even provide the coffee and sugar. And me, I provide the money. I've been good to you, and this is how you repay me. But she wouldn't work. She kept on telling me she couldn't make ends meet. That's what made me realize she was cheating on me. Then he told me he found a lottery ticket in her purse, and that she hadn't been able to explain how she paid for it. A short time later, he found the ticket from the shop in Montdepité in her room, which proved that she had pawned 2 bracelets. Until then, he hadn't even known the bracelets existed. It's clear that she was cheating on me, so I left her. But first I smacked her around. And then I told her exactly what I thought of her. I told her that all she was interested in was getting into the sack. You see, Monsieur Massot, it's like I told her. You don't realize that everybody's jealous of how good you have it with me. Someday you'll know just how good it was. He'd beaten her until she bled. He'd never beaten her before. I'd smack her around a little, but nice-like, you might say. She'd scream a little. I'd close the shutters, and it always ended the same way. But this time, it's for real. And if you ask me, she still hasn't gotten what she has coming. Then he explained that was what he needed advice about. He stopped to adjust the lamp's wick, which was smoking. I just listened. I drank close to a liter of wine and my temples were burning. I was smoking Raymond's cigarettes because I had run out. The last streetcars were going by, taking now the distant sounds of the neighborhood with them. Raymond went on. What bothered him was that he still had sexual feelings for her, but he wanted to punish her. First he thought of taking her to a hotel and calling the vice squad to cause a scandal and have her listed as a common prostitute. After that he'd look up some of his underworld friends, but they didn't come up with anything. As Raymond pointed out to me, a lot of good it does being in the underworld. He said the same thing to them, and they suggested marking her, but that wasn't what he wanted. He was going to think about it, but first he wanted to ask me something. Before he did, though, he wanted to know what I thought of the whole thing. I said I didn't think anything, but that it was interesting. He asked if I thought she was cheating on him, and it seemed to me that she was. If I thought she would be punished, and what I would do in his place, I said you can never be sure, but I understand his wanting to punish her. I drank a little more wine. He lit a cigarette and let me in on what he was thinking about doing. He wanted to write her a letter, one with a punch, and also some things in it to make her sorry for what she's done. Then, when she came running back, he'd go to bed with her, and right at the last minute, he'd spit on her face and throw her out. Yes, that would punish her, I thought. But Raymond told me he didn't think that he could write the kind of letter it would take, and that he thought of asking me to write it for him. Since I didn't say anything, he asked if I mind doing it right then, and I said no. And he downed a glass of wine and then stood up. He pushed aside the plates and a little bit of cold sausage we'd left. He'd carefully wiped the oilcloth covering on the table. Then from the drawer of his night table, he took out a sheet of paper, a yellow envelope, a small red pen box, and a square bottle with purple ink in it. When he told me the woman's name, I realized she was Moorish. I wrote the letter. I did it just as it came to me, but I tried my best to please Raymond because I didn't have any reason not to please him. Then I read it out loud. He listened, smoking and nodding his head. Then he asked me to read it again. He was very pleased. He said, I could tell you knew about these things. I didn't notice at first, but he stopped calling me Monsieur. It was only when he announced, now you're a pal, Merceau. I said it again that it struck me. He repeated his remark and I said, yes. I didn't mind being his pal, and he seemed outside. Everything was quiet. We heard the sound of a car passing. I said, it's late. Raymond thought so too. He remarked how quickly the time passed, and in a way, it was true. I I felt sleepy, but it was hard for me to get up. I must have looked tired because Raymond told me not to let things get to me. At first I didn't understand. Then he explained that he heard about Maymon's death, but that it was one of those things that was bound to happen sooner or later. I thought so too. I got up. Raymond gave me a firm handshake that said that men always understand each other. I left his room, closing the door behind me, and paused for a minute in the dark on the landing. The house was quiet, and a breath of dark, dank air wafted up from the deep in the stairwell. All I could hear was the blood pounding in my ears. I stood there motionless. In old Solomano's room, the dog whimpered softly. Chapter 4. I worked hard all week. Raymond stopped by and told me he'd sent the letter. I went to the movies twice with Emmanuel. He doesn't always understand what's going on the screen, so you have to explain things to him. Yesterday was Saturday, and Marie came over as we planned. I wanted her so bad that when I saw her in that pretty red and white striped dress and leather sandals, you could make out the shape of her firm breasts, and her tan made her face look like a flower. We caught a bus and went a few kilometers outside Algiers to a beach with rocks at either end, bordered by shore grass on the land outside. The 4 o'clock sun wasn't too hot, but the water was warm with slow, gently lapping waves. Marie had taught me a game. As you swam, you had to skim off the foam from the crest of the waves with your mouth, hold it there, and then roll onto your back and spit it out towards the sky. This made a delicate froth which disappeared into the air or fell back in a warm spray over my face. But after a while, my mouth was stinging with the salty bitterness. Then Marie swam over to me and pressed herself against me in the water. She put her lips in mine. Her tongue cooled my lips as we tumbled in the waves for a moment. When we got undressed again on the beach, Marie looked at me with her eyes sparkling. I kissed her. We didn't say anything more from that point. I held her to me as we hurried to catch a bus, get back to my place, and throw ourselves onto my bed. I left my window open, and the summer night air flowing over our bodies felt good. The morning Marie stayed, and I told her that we would have gone lunch together. And I told her that we would have lunch together. I went downstairs to buy some meat. On my way back upstairs, I heard a woman's voice in Raymond's room. A little later, old Solomano's growled at his dog, and we heard the sounds of footsteps and claws on the wooden stairs, and then, "Lousy, stinking bastard," and they went down to the street. I told Marie all about the old man, and she laughed. She was wearing a pair of my pajamas with the sleeves rolled up. When she laughed, I wanted her again. A minute later, she asked me if I loved her. I told her it didn't mean anything, but that I didn't think so. She looked sad, but as we were fixing lunch, and for no apparent reason, she laughed in such a way that I kissed her. It was then that we heard what sounded like a fight break out in Raymond's room. First we heard a woman's shrill voice, and then Raymond saying, you used me, I'll teach you to use me." There were some thuds and the woman screamed, but in such a terrifying way that the landing immediately filled with people. Marie and I went to see, too. The woman was still shrieking and Raymond was still hitting her. Marie had said it was terrible and I didn't say anything. She asked me to go find a policeman, but I told her I didn't like cops. One showed up anyway with a tenant from the 3rd floor who was a plumber. The cop knocked on the door and we couldn't hear anything anymore. He knocked harder, and after a minute the woman started crying and Raymond opened the door. He had a cigarette in his mouth and an innocent look on his face. The girl rushed to the door and told the policeman that Raymond had hit her. "What's your name?" the cop had said. Raymond told him. "Take that cigarette out of your mouth when you're talking to me," the cop said. Raymond hesitated, looked at me, and took a long drag on a cigarette. Right then the cop slapped him, a thick, heavy smack across the face. The cigarette went flying across the landing. The look on Raymond's face changed, but he didn't say anything for a minute. And then he asked in a meek voice if he could pick up the cigarette. The cop said, "Go ahead," and added, "Next time you'll know better than to clown around with a policeman." Meanwhile, the girl was crying, and she repeated, He beat me up. He's a pimp." "Officer," Raymond asked, "is that legal, calling a man a pimp like that?" The cop ordered him to shut his trap. Then Raymond turned to the girl and said, "Just you wait, sweetheart. We're not through yet." The cop told him to knock it off, said that the girl was to go, and he was to stay in his room and wait to be summoned to the police station. He also said that Raymond ought to be ashamed that to be so drunk that he'd have the shakes like that. Then Raymond explained, "I'm not drunk, officer. It's just that I'm here and then you're there and I'm shaking and I can't help it." He shut his door and everyone went away. Marie and I finished fixing lunch. She wasn't hungry. I ate almost everything. She left at 1 o'clock and I slept a while. Around 3 o'clock there was a knock on my door and Raymond came in. I didn't get up. He sat down on the edge of my bed. He didn't say anything for a minute, and I asked him how it had all gone. He told me that he had done what he wanted to do, but that she'd slapped him, and so he'd beaten her up. I'd seen the rest. I told him it seems to me that she'd gotten her punishment now, and he ought to be happy. He thought so too, and he pointed out that the cop couldn't do anything he wanted. It wouldn't change the fact that she got her beating. He added that he knew all about cops and how to handle them. Then he asked me if I'd expect him to hit the cop back. I said I wasn't expecting anything. Besides, I didn't like cops. Raymond seemed pretty happy. He asked me if I wanted to go for a walk with him. I got up and started combing my hair. He told me that I'd have to act as a witness for him. It didn't matter to me, but I didn't know what I was supposed to say. According to Raymond, all I had to do was state that the girl had cheated on him. I agreed to act as a witness for him. We went out and Raymond bought me a brandy. Then he wanted to shoot a game of pool, and I just barely lost. Afterwards, he wanted to go to a whorehouse, but I said no because I don't like that. So we took our time getting back. Him telling me how glad he was that he'd been able to give that woman what she deserved. I found him very friendly with me, and I thought it was a nice moment. From a distance, I noticed old Solomano was standing on the doorstep. When we got closer, I saw he didn't have his dog. He was looking all over the place, turning around, peering into the darkness of the entryway, muttering incoherently, and then he started searching the street again with his little red eyes. When Raymond asked him what was wrong, he didn't answer right away. I barely heard him mumble, "Stinking bastard," and went on fidgeting around. I asked him where his dog was. He snapped at me and said it was gone. Then all of a sudden the words came pouring out. "I took him to the parade ground, like always. There were lots of people around the booths in the fair. I stopped to watch the king of escape artists, and when I was ready to go, he wasn't there. Sure, I've been meaning to get him a smaller collar for some time, but I never thought the bastard would take off like that." Then Raymond pointed out to him that the dog may have gotten lost and that he would come back. He gave examples of dogs that have walked dozens of kilometers to get back to their masters. Nevertheless, the old man looked even more flustered. "But they'll take him away from me, don't you see? If only somebody would take him in. But that's impossible. Everybody's disgusted by his scabs. The police will get him for sure." So I told him she'd go to the pound and they'd give the dog back to him after he paid a fee. He asked me if it was a big fee. I didn't know. Then he got mad. "Money for that bastard? Ha! He can damn well die." And he started cursing the dog. Raymond laughed and went inside. I followed him and we parted upstairs on the landing. A minute later I heard the old man's footsteps and he knocked on my door. When I opened it, he stood in the doorway for a minute and said, Excuse me. I asked him to come in, but he refused. He was looking down at the tips of his shoes and his scabby hands were trembling. Without looking up at me, he asked, "They're not going to take him away from me, are they, Monsieur Masson? They'll give him back to me. Otherwise, what's going to happen to me?" I told him that the pound kept dogs for 3 days so that their owners could come and claim him, and that after that they did with them what they saw fit. He looked at me in silence. Then he said, "Good night." He shut his door and I heard him pacing back and forth. His bed creaked, and from peculiar little noises coming through the partition, I realized he was crying. For some reason I thought of Maymon, but I had to get up early in the morning. I wasn't hungry, and I went to bed without any dinner. Chapter 5. Raymond called me at the office. He told me that a friend of his, he'd spoken to him about me, was near Algiers. I said I'd really like to, but I'd promised to spend the day with a girlfriend. Raymond immediately told me that she was invited too. His friend's wife would be very glad not to be alone with a bunch of men. I wanted to hang up right away because I know the boss doesn't like people calling us from town. But Raymond asked me to hang on and told me that he could have passed on the invitation that evening, but he had something else to tell me. He'd been followed all day by a group of Arabs, one of whom was the brother of his former mistress. If you see him hanging around the building when you get home this evening, let me know. I said I would. A little later, my boss sent for me, and for a second I was annoyed, because I thought he was going to tell me to do less talking on the phone and more work. But that wasn't it at all. He told me he wanted to talk to me about a plan of his that was still pretty vague. He wanted to have my opinion on the matter. He was planning to open an office in Paris, which would handle his business directly with the big companies on the spot, and he wanted to know how I felt about going there. I'd be able to live in Paris and to travel around for part of the year as well. You're young, and it seems to me that it's the kind of life that would appeal to you. I said yes, but that really was all the same to me. Then he asked me if I wasn't interested in a change of life. I said that people never changed their lives, that in any case one life was as good as another, and that I wasn't dissatisfied with mine here at all. He looked upset and told me that I never gave him a straight answer, that I had no ambition, and that was disastrous in business. So I went back to work. I would rather not have upset him, but I couldn't see any reason to change my life. Looking back on it, I wasn't unhappy. When I was a student, I had lots of ambition like that. When I had to give up my studies, I learned very quickly that none of it really mattered. That evening, Marie came by to see me and asked me if I wanted to marry her. I said it didn't make any difference to me that we could if she wanted to. Then she wanted to know if I loved her. I answered the same way I had last time, that it didn't mean anything to me, but that I probably didn't love her. So why marry me then, she said. I explained to her that it didn't really matter and that if she wanted to, we could get married. Besides, she was the one who was doing all the asking, and I was saying yes. Then she pointed out that marriage was a serious thing. I said no. She stopped talking for a minute and looked at me without saying anything. Then she spoke. She wanted to know if I would have accepted the same proposal from another woman with whom I was involved in the same way. I said sure. Then she said she wondered if she loved me, and there was no way I could know about that. After another moment's silence, she murmured that I was peculiar, and that was probably why she loved me, but that one day I might hate her for the same reason. I didn't say anything, because I didn't have anything to add, so she took my arm with a smile and said she wanted to marry me. I said we could do it whenever she wanted. Then I told her about my boss's proposition, and then she said she'd love to see Paris. I told her that I'd lived there once, and then she asked me what it was like. I said, it's dirty, lots of pigeons and dark courtyards, and everyone's pale. Then we went for a walk through the main streets to the other end of town. The women were beautiful, and I asked Marie if she noticed. She said yes, and that she understood what I meant. For a while, neither of us said anything, but I wanted her to stay with me, and I told her we could have dinner together at Celeste's. She would have liked to, but she had something to do. We were near my place, and I said goodbye to her. She looked at me. Don't you want to know what I have to do? I did, but I hadn't thought to ask, and she seemed to be scolding me. Then, seeing me so confused, she laughed again and moved towards me with her whole body to offer me her lips. I had dinner at Celeste's. I had already started eating when a strange little woman came in and asked me if she could sit at my table. Of course she could. Her gestures were a little jerky, and she had bright eyes and a little face like an apple. She took off her jacket, sat down, and studied the menu feverishly. She called Celeste over and ordered her whole meal at once, in a voice that was clear and very fast at the same time. While she was waiting for her first course, she opened her bag, took out a slip of paper and a pencil, added the bill in advance, and then took the exact amount, plus tip, out of her vest pocket, and set it down on the table in front of her. At that point, the waiter brought her first course, and she gulped it down. While waiting for the next course, she again took out of her bag a blue pencil and a magazine that was listing the radio programs for the week. One by one, and with great care, she checked off almost every program. Since the magazine was about a dozen pages long, she meticulously continued the task throughout the meal. I had already finished, and she was still checking away with the same zeal. Then she stood up, put her jacket back on with the same robot-like movements, and left.
I didn't have anything to do, so I left too, and followed her for a while. She had positioned herself right next to the curb and was making her way with incredible speed and assurance, never once swerving or looking around. I eventually lost sight of her and turned back. I thought about how peculiar she was, but forgot about her a few minutes later. I found old Salamano waiting outside my door. I asked him in, and he told me that his dog was lost because it wasn't at the pound. The people who worked there had told him that maybe it had been run over. He asked if he could find out at the police station. They told him that they didn't keep track of things like that because they happened every day. They told old Salamano that he could get another dog, but he was right to point me out that he was used to this one. I was sitting cross-legged in my bed, and Salamano had sat down on a chair in front of the table. He was facing me and had both hands on his knees. He had kept his old felt hat on. He was mumbling bits and pieces of sentences through his yellowing mustache. He was getting on my nerves a little, but I didn't have anything to do, and I didn't feel sleepy. Just for something to say, I asked him about his dog. He told me he had gotten it after his wife died. He had married fairly late. When he was young, he wanted to go into the theater. In the army, he used to act in military vaudevilles. But he had ended up working on the railroads and didn't regret it, because now he had a small pension. He hadn't been happy with his wife, but he had pretty much gotten used to her. When she died, he had been very lonely. So he asked a shop buddy for a dog he had gotten, and he had gotten this one very young. He'd had to feed it from a bottle. But since a dog doesn't live as long as a man, they ended up being old together. He was very bad-tempered, Salamano said. We'd have a run-in every now and then, but he was a good dog just the same. And I said he was well-bred, and Salamano looked pleased. And he added, oh, excuse me, hold on 1 second. I gotta take care of this 1 second. Sorry about that. I had to take care of something real quick. Let's see. Where was I? He was bad-tempered, Salamano said. We'd have a run-in every now and then, but he was a good dog just the same. I said he was well-bred, and Salamano looked pleased. And, he added, you didn't know him before he got sick. His cut was the best thing about him. Every night and every morning after the dog had gotten that skin disease, Salamano rubbed him with ointment. But according to him, the dog's real sickness was old age, and there was no cure for old age. You know what the heck, I had to... got a package. The creator needed my help real quick with it, so I ended up going out to help him real quick. Didn't need much of my help, but, you know. I had to make sure he didn't, like, throw his back out, the old man. Anyway. At that point, I yawned, and the old man said he'd be going. I told him he could stay, and that I was sorry about what happened to his dog. He thanked me. He told me that my mom was very fond of his dog. He called her your poor mother. He said he'd suppose I must be very sad since my mom died, and didn't say anything. Then he said, very quickly and with an embarrassed look, that he realized that some people in the neighborhood thought badly of me for having sent my mom to the home, but he knew me, he knew I loved her very much. I still don't know why, but I said that until then I hadn't realized that people had thought badly of me for doing it, but that the home had seemed like a natural thing since I didn't have enough money to have my mom care for it. Anyway, I added, it had been a long time since she'd had anything to say to me, and she was bored all by herself. Hi, Boo-Boo. Hi, buddy. You're invading stream again? Booby's here. He's probably gonna start rubbing up against them. Oh, nope, he's just gonna plop right in front of me. Let me just unplug my keyboard really quick. Yeah. And he's laying on my mouse. And what is this stuck to your tail, buddy? How did you get tape stuck to your tail? Where were you? Where were you? Ugh, he's still on my on the keyboard, of course. Hold on. 1 moment. On the keyboard. Give me a sec. sit on my keyboard, buddy? Hi, bud. Well, I got hijacked for my stream. He's laying on my book. He's laying on my book. Okay, thank you, buddy. Get that book back. Hi, boo-boo. What's up? Hi, baby boy. Oh. What's wrong? He's like pushing the book away from my hand. He keeps pushing the book away from my hand. He wants attention. Oh, you guys, it's always... I can't go one stream without Booby invading it. Right, buddy? No. Oh, no. Alright, let's see if we can continue. Let's see. Anyway, I added, it had been a long time since she said anything to me, and she was bored all by herself. Yes, he said. At least in the home you can make a few friends. Then he said goodnight. He wanted to sleep. His life had changed now, and he wasn't too sure what he was going to do. For the first time since I'd known him, and with a furtive gesture, he offered me his hand, and it felt like scales on his and I felt the scales on his skin. He gave a little smile before he left. He said, "I hope the dogs don't bark tonight. I always think it's mine." Chapter 6. I had a hard time waking up on Sunday, and Marie had to call me and shake me. We didn't eat anything, because we wanted to get to the beach early. I felt completely drained and had a slight headache. My cigarette tasted bitter. Marie made fun of me because she said I had on a funeral face. She put on a white linen dress and let her hair down. I told her she was beautiful, and she laughed with delight. On our way downstairs, we knocked on Raymond's door. He told us he'd be right down. Once out in the street, because I was so tired and also because we hadn't opened the blinds that day, the day, already bright with sun, hit me like a slap in the face. Marie was jumping with joy and kept on saying what a beautiful day it was. I felt a little better and noticed that I was hungry. I told Marie, who pointed to her oilcloth bag where she put our bathing suits and a towel. I just had to wait, and then we heard Raymond shutting his door. He had on a blue trousers and a white short-sleeved shirt, but he put on a straw hat, which made Marie laugh, and his forearms were all white under the black hairs. I found it a little repulsive. He was whistling as he came down the stairs, and he seemed very cheerful. He said, "Good morning, old man," to me, and called Marie Mademoiselle. The day before, we had gone to the police station. I testified that the girl had cheated on Raymond. He'd gone off with a warning. They didn't check out my statement. Outside the front door, we talked about it with Raymond, and then we decided to take the bus. The beach wasn't very far, but we'd get there sooner that way. Raymond thought his friend would be glad to see us get there early. We were just about to leave when all of a sudden Raymond motioned to me to look across the street. I saw a group of Arabs leaning against the front of the tobacconist's shop. They were staring at us in silence, but in that way of theirs, as if there were nothing but stones or dead trees. Raymond told me that the second one from the left was his man, and he seemed worried. But he added it was all settled now. Marie didn't understand and asked us what was wrong. I told her that they were Arabs who had it in for Raymond. She wanted to get going right away. Raymond drew himself up and laughed, saying we'd better step on it. We headed towards the bus stop, which wasn't far, and Raymond said that the Arabs weren't following us. I turned around. They were still in the same place, and they were looking at with the same indifference at the spot where we were just been standing. We caught the bus. Raymond, who seemed very relieved, kept on cracking jokes for Marie. I could tell he liked her, but she hardly said anything to him. Every once in a while, she'd look at him and laugh. We got off in the outskirts of Algiers. The beach wasn't far from the bus stop, but we had to cross a small plateau which looks over the sea, then drops steeply down onto the beach. It was covered with yellowish rocks and the whitest asphodels set against the already hard blue of the sky. Marie was having fun scattering the pebbles, taking big swipes at them with her oilcloth bag. We walked between rows of small houses behind green or white fences, some with their verandas hidden behind the tamarisks, others standing naked among the rocks. Before we reached the edge of the plateau, we could already see the motionless sea, and farther out, a massive, drowsy-looking promontory in the clear water. The faint hum of a motor rose up to us in the still air. And way off, we saw a tiny trawler moving, almost imperceptibly, across the dazzling sea. Marie gathered some rock irises. From the slope leading down to the beach, we could see that there were already some people swimming. Raymond's friends lived in a little wooden bungalow at the far end of the beach. The back of the house rested against the rocks, and the pilings that held it up in front were straight down into the water. Raymond introduced us. His friend's name was Mason. He was a big guy, very tall and broad-shouldered, with a plump, sweet little wife and with a Parisian accent. Right off, he told us to make ourselves feel at home, and that his wife had just fried up some fish he caught this morning. I told him how nice I thought his house was. He told me that he spent Saturdays and Sundays and all of his days off there, with my wife, of course. Just then, his wife was laughing with Marie. For the first time, maybe, I really thought I was going to get married. Mason wanted to go for a swim, but his wife and Raymond didn't want to come. The three of us just went down to the beach and Marie jumped right in. Mason and I waited a little. He spoke slowly, and I noticed that he had a habit of finishing everything he said with, and I'd even say, which really didn't add anything to the meaning of his sentence. Referring to Marie, he said, "She's stunning," and I'd even say charming. After that, I didn't pay any more attention to this mannerism of his, because I was absorbed with the feeling that the sun was doing me a lot of good. I'm sorry, I have a bit of a stutter today, I'm so sorry. The sand was starting to get hot underfoot. I held back the urge to get into the water a minute longer, but finally I said to Mason, "Shall we?" I dove in. He went slowly and started swimming only when he couldn't touch bottom anymore. He did a breaststroke, and not too well either, so I left him and joined Marie. The water was cold and I was glad to be swimming. Together again, Marie and I swam out a ways, and we felt a closeness as we moved in unison and were happy. Out in deep water, we floated on our backs, and the sun on my upturned face was drying the last of the water trickling into my mouth. We saw Mason make his way to the beach and stretch out in the sun. From far away, he looked huge. Marie wanted us to swim together. I got behind her to hold her around the waist. She used her arms to move us forward, and I did the kicking. The little splashing sounds followed us through the morning air until I got tired. I left Marie and headed back, swimming smoothly and breathing easily. On the beach, I stretched out on my stomach alongside Mason and put my face on the sand. I said it was nice, and he agreed. Soon afterward, Marie came back. I rolled over to watch her coming. She was glistening all over with salty water and holding her hair back. She lay down right next to me, and the combined warmth from her body and from the sun made me doze off. Marie shook me and told me that Mason had gone back up to the house and that it was time for lunch. I got up right away because I was hungry. Marie told me I hadn't kissed her since this morning. It was true, and yet I had wanted to. "Come into the water," she said. We ran and threw ourselves into the first little waves. We swam. "Sir, would you like to sit down?" Good boy. That's the mic, buddy. Here, let me lift it up for you a bit. I don't know if you can hear him trying to rub up against the mic. Why are you rubbing up against? Why are you rubbing? Stop rubbing up against the mic, buddy. Come on. He likes rubbing up against the mic. I'm sorry, you guys. Buddy, what are you doing? Come on. Sit down. Sit down. Relax. That's a good boy. There we go. Such a good boy. Come into the water, she said. We ran and threw ourselves into the first little waves. We swam around a few strokes, and she reached out and held on to me. I felt her legs wrap around mine, and I wanted her. When we got back, Mason was already calling us. After that, there was some meat and fried potatoes. Buddy, come on, sit down. down. I love you too. I love you too, buddy. Oh my goodness gracious. I love you too. Stop trying to knock the book out of my hand. I'm giving you attention. This happens every time I stream. Why are you like this? Why are you like this? Oh. He wants cuddles. He's resting his head on my chest. He wants cuddles. The sweet baby boy. Oh, I love you too. Gotta let Mama finish reading though. Gotta let Mama finish reading. Silly boy. Okay. We all ate without talking. Mason drank a lot of wine and kept filling my glass. By the time the coffee came, my head felt heavy and I smoked a lot. Mason, Raymond, and I talked about spending August together at the beach, sharing expenses. Suddenly, Marie said, "Do you know what time it is? It's only 11:30. We were all surprised, but Mason said we'd eaten very early and that it was only natural because lunchtime was whenever you were hungry. For some reason, that made Marie laugh. I think she had a little too much to drink. Then Mason asked me if I wanted to go for a walk on the beach with him. My wife always takes a nap after lunch. Me, I don't like naps. I need to walk. I tell her all the time that it's better for her health, but it's her business. Marie says she'd stay and help Madame Mason with the dishes. The little Parisian said that the first they'd have to get rid of the men. The three of us went down to the beach. The sun was shining almost directly overhead on the sand, and the glare on the water was unbearable. There was no one left on the beach. From beside the bungalows bordering the plateau and jutting over the water, you could hear the rattling of plates and silverware. It was hard to breathe in the rocky heat rising from the ground. At first, Raymond and Mason discussed people and things I didn't know about. I gathered they'd known each other a long time and had even lived together at one point. We headed to the sea and walked along the water's edge. Now and then a little wave would come up higher than the others and wet our canvas shoes. I wasn't thinking about anything because I was half asleep from the sun beating down my bare head. At one point, Raymond said something to Mason which I didn't quite catch, but at the same time I noticed at the far end of the beach and a long way from us, two Arabs in blue overalls coming in our direction. I looked at Raymond and he said, "It's him." We kept walking. Mason asked how they managed to follow us all this way. I thought they might have seen us get on the bus with a beach bag, but I didn't say anything. The Arabs were walking slowly, but they were already much closer. We didn't change our pace, but Raymond said, "If there's any trouble, Mason, you take the other one. I'll take care of my men. Marcel, if another one shows up, he's yours." I said yes, and Mason put his hands in his pockets. The blazing sand looked red to me now. We moved steadily towards the Arabs. The distance between us was getting shorter and shorter. When we were just a few steps away from each other, the Arabs stopped. Mason and I slowed down. Raymond went right up to his man. I couldn't hear what he said to him, but the other guy made a move as though he was going to butt him. Then Raymond struck the first blow and called Mason right away. Mason went for the one that had been pointed out as his and hit him twice as hard as he could. The Arab guy fell flat in the water, face down, and lay there for several seconds with bubbles bursting out of the surface around his head. Meanwhile, Raymond had landed one too, and the other Arab's face was bleeding. Raymond turned to me and said, "Watch this, I'm going to let him have it now." I shouted, "Look out, he's got a knife," but Raymond's arm had already been cut open, his mouth slashed. Mason lunged forward, but the other Arab had gotten back up and gone around behind the one with the knife. We didn't dare move. They started backing off slowly without taking their eyes off us, keeping us at bay with the knife. When they thought they were far enough away, they took off running as fast as they could while they stood there motionless in the sun, and Raymond clutched his arm, dripping with blood. Mason immediately said there was a doctor who spent his Sundays up on the plateau. Raymond wanted to go see him right away, but every time he tried to talk, the blood bubbled up in his mouth. We steadied him and made our way back to the bungalow as quickly as we could. Once there, Raymond said that there were only flesh wounds and that he could make it to the doctor. He left with Mason, and I stayed to explain to the women what happened. Madame Mason was crying, and Marie was very pale. I never liked to have to explain to them, so I just shut up, smoked a cigarette, and looked up at the sea. Raymond came back with Mason around 1:30. His arm was bandaged up and he had an adhesive plastered on the corner of his mouth. The doctor told him it was nothing, but Raymond looked pretty grim. Mason tried to make him laugh, but he still wouldn't say anything. When he said he was going to go down to the beach, I asked him where he was going. He said he wanted some air. Mason and I said we'd go with him, but that made him angry. He swore at us. Mason said not to argue with him. I followed him anyway. We walked on the beach for a long time. By now the sun was overpowering. It shattered into little pieces on the sand and water. I had the impression that Raymond knew where he was going, but I was probably wrong. At the far end of the beach, we finally came to a little spring running down through the sand behind a large rock. There we found the two Arabs. They were lying down in their greasy overalls. They seemed perfectly calm and almost content. Our coming changed nothing. The one who attacked Raymond was looking at him without saying anything. The other one was blowing through a little reed over and over again, watching us out of the corner of his eye. He kept repeating only 3 notes that he could get out of his instrument. The whole time there was nothing but the sun and silence, with a low gurgling from the spring and the 3 notes. Then Raymond put his hand in his pocket, but the others didn't move. They just kept looking at each other. I noticed that the toes of the one playing the flute were tensed, but without taking his eyes off his adversary. Raymond asked me, should I let him have it? I thought that if I said no, he'd get himself all worked and shoot for sure. All I said was, he hasn't said anything yet. It'd be pretty lousy to shoot him like that. You could hear the sound of the water and the flute deep within the silence and the heat. Then Raymond said, so I'll call him something, and when he answers back, I'll let him have it. I answered, right, but if he doesn't draw his knife, you can't shoot. Raymond started getting worked up. The other Arabs went on playing, and both of them were watching every move Raymond made. No, I said to Raymond, take him on man to man and give me your gun. If the other one moves, or if he draws his knife, I'll let him have it. The sun glinted off Raymond's guns as he handed it to me, but we stood there motionless, as if everything had closed in around us. We stared at each other without blinking, and everything came to a stop between the sea, the sand, and the sun, and the double silence of the flute and the water. It's then that I realized that you could either shoot or not shoot. Then all of a sudden, the Arabs backing away slipped behind the rocks. So Raymond and I turned and headed back the way we came. He seemed better and talked about the bus back. I went with him as far as the bungalow as he climbed up the wooden steps. I just stood there, at the bottom, my head ringing from the sun, unable to face the effort it would take to climb the wooden staircase. Come on. Oh, I lost my page. Oh no! Sorry, I lost my page. Oh, there it is. Oh yes, unable to face the effort it would take to climb the wooden staircase and face the woman again. The heat was so intense that it was just as bad standing in the blinding stream falling in the sky. To say or to go, it amounted to the same thing. A minute later, I turned back towards the beach and started walking. There was the same dazzling red glare. The sea gasped for air with each shallow, stifled little wave that broke onto the sand. I was walking slowly towards the rocks, and I could feel my forehead swelling under the sun. All that heat was pressing down on me and making it hard for me to go on. And every time I felt a blast of its hot breath strike my face. I gritted my teeth, clenched my fist in my trouser pockets, and strained every nerve in order to overcome the sum of the thick drunkenness of it spilling over me. With every blade of light that flashed off the sand from a bleached shell or a piece of broken glass, my jaw tightened. I walked for a long time. From a distance I could see a small dark mass of rocks surrounded by a blinding halo of light and sea spray. I was thinking of the cooling spring behind the rock. I wanted to hear the murmur of its water again, to escape the sun and the strain of the women's tears, and to find shade and rest again at last. You going, buddy? You letting me go now? This cat, I love this cat. He's such a goofball. but as I got closer, I saw that Raymond's man had come back. He was alone. He was lying on his back with his hand behind his head, his forehead in the shade of the rock, and the rest of his body in the sun. His blue overalls seemed to be steaming in the heat. I was a little surprised. As far as I was concerned, the whole thing was over and had gone there without even thinking about it. As soon as he saw me, he sat up a little and put his hand in his pocket. Naturally, I gripped Raymond's gun inside my jacket. Then he laid back, but without taking his hand off his pocket. I was pretty far away from him, about 10 meters or so. I could tell he was glancing at me now and then through half-closed eyes. But most of the time, he was just a form shimmering before my eyes in the fiery air. The sound of the waves was even lazier, more drawn out than at noon. It was the same sun, the same light still shining in the same sand as before. For 2 hours, the day had stood still. For 2 hours, it had been anchored in a sea of molten lead. On the horizon, a tiny steamer went by, and I made out the black dot from the corner of my eye because I hadn't stopped watching the Arab. It occurred to me that all I had to do was turn around and that would be the end of it. But the whole beach, throbbing in the sun, was pressing on my back. I took a few steps towards the spring. The Arab didn't move. Besides, he was still pretty far away. Maybe it was the shadow on his face, but he looked like he was laughing. I waited. The sun was starting to burn my cheeks, and I could feel the drops of sweat gathering in my eyebrows. The sun was the same as it had been the day I buried my mom. And then, like then, my forehead especially was hurting me, all the veins in it throbbing under the skin. It was this burning, which I couldn't stand anymore, that made me move forward. I knew that it was stupid, that I wouldn't get the sun off me by stepping forward. But I took one step forward, and this time, without getting up, the Arab drew his knife and held it up to me in the sun. The light shot off the steel, and it was like a long, flashing blade cutting at my forehead. At the same instant, the sweat in my eyebrows dripped over my eyelids, and all at once, it covered them with a warm, thick film. My eyes were blinded by the curtain of tears and salt. All I could feel was the symbols of sunlight crashing on my forehead, and an indistinct, dazzling spear flying up from the knife in front of me. The scorching blade slashed at my eyelashes and stabbed in my stinging eyes. That's when everything began to reel. The sea carried up a thick, fiery breath. It seems to me as if the sky split open from one end to the other to rain down fire. My whole being tensed, and I squeezed my hand around the revolver. The trigger gave, and I felt the smooth underside of the butt, and there, in that noise, sharp and deafening at the same time, is where it all started. I shook off the sweat and sun. I knew that I had shattered the harmony of the day, the exceptional silence of a beach where I'd been happy. Then I fired 4 more times at the motionless body where the bullets lodged without leaving a trace. It was like knocking 4 quick times on the door of unhappiness. Part 2. I'm actually going to leave it here because part 2 would be the rest of the story, I do believe. Double check. Let's see. Yep. So I'm going to leave it here for now. We are literally halfway through the book, which is great. And our main character just killed somebody in cold blood. And we're going to see the aftermath of that next time. Sorry for all the interruptions from my dear fluffy son. He's been very cuddly lately, as per usual. So, what do you guys think of the story so far? How do you guys feel about Merceau, our lovely protagonist? He's a very interesting individual, isn't he? But, yeah, so maybe next week, we'll end up finishing the story. If we have plenty of time, we might end up playing a game afterwards. Who knows? But, quite literally halfway through the book. Don't make fun of my speech impediment, okay? I'm sorry. Today's not a good day, okay? Okay, I'm sorry I have a bit of a speech impediment today. Today is not that great for me. Some days are better than others, okay? Quite I wasn't making fun of you, lol. Okay. I know I stumbled over my words a little bit today. Today's one of those days where I'm just like mimimish. I like doing that voice and I want to read that. That's fine. But yeah, yeah, so that's it for today. Next week we'll probably end up finishing it. And, yeah. And when I hear people say literally, it triggers that voice in my head. Fair enough. So, but we are literally halfway through the book. Like, it is a complete clear divide right down the middle where my bookmark is. So, thank you guys so much for being here. Thanks so much for hanging out with me. I hope you guys enjoyed the story so far. We'll be finishing it next week. And Thursday, we will be going back to playing some more Amori. I hope you all have a wonderful Wednesday. I hope you guys have a lovely rest of your day, night, evening, whatever time it may be. And, yeah. Just remember, hug your friends, tell someone you love them, and be a force for good in the world, because goodness knows the world needs more goodness. I love you guys so very, very, very much, and I'll see you guys on Thursday for more Amori. I'll be seeing you guys. Have a great day. Mwah! And take care of yourselves. Bye!